There are millions and millions of financial analysts and investors that are currently begging for Jerome Powell to pivot and stop raising interest rates because they believe that that is going to pump the markets full of liquidity and everything's going to go to the moon. But the data I'm going to show you in today's video is going to suggest quite the otherwise. So obviously we all know Jerome Powell raised interest rates only 25 basis points yesterday at that February 1st FOMC meeting, and lots of people are very optimistic about this interest rate rise because obviously he has pivoted away from raising at 75 basis points down to 50 basis points in January, and now today he's only raising by 25 basis points. And many investors think that this is a good thing because obviously we saw what happened to the financial markets in 2022 when the Fed raised interest rates from 0.25% to 4.5%. What happened was, during the fastest rate hiking schedule in history, assets had their worst year in decades, okay? Stocks and bonds collectively actually had their worst yearly performance in 2022 than they have in centuries, okay? The 10-year Treasury bond in the United States, for example, actually had its worst year since the year 1776. So obviously, lots of people are looking at the financial markets from the viewpoint, okay, Fed raised interest rates in 2022, assets crashed. That means when the Fed cuts interest rates, assets are going to pump. The data I'm going to show you in today's video suggests quite the otherwise. So without further ado, let's get straight into this video. Welcome back to the CoinBeast channel. If you are new here, my name is Luke and we do all sorts of things here on the channel. We interview great guests like Jeff Booth, Preston Pish, and of course George Gammon, who we recently had on. And then sometimes we do short and sharp little macro videos like we're going to do today. So if any of that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you're notified for when I drop any one of those videos. Now, getting straight into the chart I want to show you guys. This is it. So this chart is looking back at 70 years of data, and all it is showing us is the S&P 500, as well as on the bottom we have the federal funds rate. And you can see every single time that the Fed pivots its interest rate policy, the financial markets crash in the following months and years. So 1969, you can see there on the chart, the Fed pivots and the markets crash 36%. Again, 4 years later, the Fed pivots once again, and guess what happens? The markets sell off 48%. 1981, the Fed pivoted, and the markets sold off 27%. And now again, let's fast forward to 2000. We saw a Fed pivot in early 2000, and guess what we saw? 51% crash in the asset market. Same thing in 2007. One of the more recent recessions, we all know what happened in the '08 global financial crisis. The Fed pivoted in 2007, markets crashed 58%, and the most recent, 2019, the Fed pivoted in early 2019, and we know that the markets crashed in early 2020 by 35%. So what comes next? It looks as if the Fed is going to pivot its interest rate policy at some point in 2023 or 2024. And this is where most people get things wrong. They say they think that the Fed pivot is money printing, okay? It's not. There are two stages in a Fed pivot. First, they slow down the interest rate rises, they pause, and then they cut interest rates, okay? So that's what's happening right now. Right now, we're at phase one of the Fed pivot. We're at the phase where interest rates are now, instead of going up by 75 basis points at each meeting, they've slowed to 50 basis points in January. Today, 25 basis points in February, and we're expected to see a pause in the next couple of months. And then when the first kind of phase of the pivot happens is when, instead of rates being held at 4.5% like they are today, when the Federal Reserve starts cutting rates, that's danger. That is when you don't want to be invested in the markets, because that is the typical definition of a pivot, okay? That is a change in direction of monetary policy. And it's not actually until we see one of these massive asset crashes that the Fed steps in with phase two of the pivot. And that is unlimited liquidity via money printing, okay? That's what picks the markets back up in most cases. So obviously we're thinking about 2020. Think about what happened. Okay, markets crashed by 35% in March of 2020 in the space of 3 weeks. The Fed stepped in on, I think it was March 21st or 22nd, announcing that they would supply unlimited liquidity to bail out the asset markets. And more in particular, it was actually to bail out the bond market, okay? The Fed isn't so concerned about the stock market, it's more concerned about the functioning of the treasury market, okay? That is the big market. That's the one the Fed's worried about, not necessarily the stock market. And of course, we all know what happened to the financial markets after March of 2020 when the Fed stepped in with, in their words, unlimited QE infinity, okay? Markets absolutely took off to the races. So what is the takeaway from this chart that I really want to drill into, okay? You got to be careful about what you guys wish for, okay? Because when the Fed does pause their interest rate hikes and potentially has to begin cutting their interest rate hikes, that's because, guess what? We got bad economic data coming down the pipeline. That means there's going to be a recession coming. Economic data is going to be slowing significantly. And typically, stock markets actually crash as the Fed cuts rates, okay? So be on the lookout. The Fed cutting rates is not a bullish thing for the markets, okay? What's bullish for the markets is when the Fed has to come in there and rescue the markets with QE infinity. When they start firing up those money printers and they're throwing liquidity into all little parts of the financial markets, that is when it's good for asset prices.